Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Paula Dinnerstein, and I am the president of the board of directors of Beyond Pesticides. And I'm here to welcome you to the 42nd National Forum Series. And yes, we really have been doing this for 42 years. This session, there's two parts to it. This is the first one. It's entitled The Pesticide Threat to Environmental Health, Advancing Holistic Solutions Aligned with Nature. This session will focus on bringing farming and wildlife together to support each other, working together. And we'll focus particularly on bats, birds, and beavers. We have four renowned speakers who will be presenting today. And at the end, there will be a question and answer session that the panelists and all of you can participate in. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jay Feldman, the Executive Director of Beyond Pesticides, who will give an introduction to both the topics and the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody, to the forum. We cannot survive without healthy ecosystems. In working together as people and communities across the US and around the world, our approach to land management must embrace nature for its extraordinary and exhilarating beauty and complexity, but also to ensure productivity, profitability, quality of life, and environmental and personal health. A sustainable future requires us to respect nature, define materials that do no harm, eliminate petrochemical pesticides and fertilizers, and certify, label, and enforce practices, recognizing that when we support nature, nature will support us. Our daily objective at Beyond Pesticides is to inform action to empower advocacy with science, policy solutions, and practical implementation of cost-effective alternatives. Conventional chemical-intensive land management practices are not sustainable. Petrochemical pesticides and fertilizer dependency contribute significantly to escalating crises in health, biodiversity, and climate. These practices have led to entrenched chemical reliance, creating a treadmill with increasing pesticide resistance in the target insects, weeds, and harmful bacterial and fungal populations. Our current conventional land management practices lack resiliency and have become unaffordable, whether it is the growing of our food or the managing of our landscapes. Instead of cycling nutrients in tandem with nature, conventional practices contaminate the habitats and ecosystems of the very organisms that offer their ecosystem services for free. The catastrophic decline of pollinators and insects in general is not attributable to one chemical or chemical family, but a constellation of chemical mixtures, synergistic effects, and synthetic fertilizers, among other factors. Rachel Carson warned in her book Silent Spring, quote, "By their very nature, chemical controls are self-defeating, for they have been devised and applied without taking into account complex biological systems," end quote. In this spirit, the United Nations Environment Program states, quote, "Producing food that is both healthy and sustainable demands that we work with, not against nature," end quote. The solution requires, as the UN says, reconceiving the food system. We can feed the world and embrace nature with organic systems that eliminate petrochemicals on the farm, build productivity, and actually outcompete chemical-intensive practices. Resilient organic systems generate higher long-term productivity and profitability, according to the Rodale Institute's 40-year longitudinal study. Other published data show organic production with equivalent to higher corn and soybean yields than chemical-intensive practices. Now, high-tech farming or precision agriculture with the use of drones, satellites, and artificial intelligence is being touted as a great environmental achievement, focused on soil biology and lower or variable application rates of petrochemical pesticides and fertilizers, thus ignoring holistic and interdependent elements in nature. Labeling these practices as sustainable integrated pest management or regenerative undercuts ecosystem health. We are all here to ensure a livable and just future, and to cultivate a collective concern about daily decisions on the management of our personal and community spaces, practices used to grow the food we eat, and the care we as a society give to a complex and fragile natural world on which life depends. With that, I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Danilo Russo, a full professor of ecology at the University of Naples, Federico II, Naples, Italy. Dr. Russo is a holistic thinker, integrating deep research into bats with a broad view of the variables and complexities of the ecosystems in which they live. His academic achievements are many: co-editor of A Natural History of Bat Foraging and author of over 200 scientific articles, including a recent piece advocating for, quote, a more inclusive framework acknowledging the indispensable role of common species in ecosystem services and biodiversity. His research on bats provides us with a framework for embracing nature more broadly in our own advocacy for responsible practices and policies. Dr. Russo's field research has taken him around the world. Now, please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to place questions that Dr. Russo and the other presenters today can address during the discussion section later in the program. With that, welcome Dr. Danilo Russo to the forum. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm honored to be here with you today, and I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay, I hope you can see it. My talk today will be about bats, and my focus will be about why farmland need bats and why bats need farmland. First of all, a few words about bats. Bats are a biodiverse group with 1,500 species, so they are the second largest group of mammals. And they're ecologically flexible. Actually, we find bats in a broad range of different environmental conditions. You have bats everywhere except the poles, actually. And this tells you something about how adaptable they are. They're long-lived. Many people don't know that bats may live up to over 40 years. 41 years is the documented record. And they're slowly reproducing. So despite being small mammals, they actually have the features of large mammals. They're long-lived, and they normally give birth to one, sometimes two young per year. Bats are at risk because they are highly sensitive to the impact of human action on ecosystems, as we'll see. And one of the impacts we'll talk about is actually pesticide, but not only that, more generally, the management of conventional farmland, which may have detrimental effects on these mammals. Bats are often insectivorous, and this actually sets the scene for one of their key ecosystem services they provide, which is insect consumption in farmland and beyond. And they're also important natural enemies of recognized pest species. So I'm going to move to ecosystem service delivery of bats in a minute. And I will start by saying that the role of bats in agriculture is an emerging topic in bat ecology. During the last 10, 15 years, we had a wealth of publication highlighting the important roles of these mammals in agriculture. But if you look back in the days, the role of bats as pest consumers, pest controllers, was actually already known. And one of the first attempts to attract bats to farmland to enjoy the benefit of their insectivorous activity actually dates back to 1907 in Texas, where there was a big problem with malaria and mosquitoes. But these huge bat towers, which were the equivalent of current bat boxes, just way bigger, were built. And the effects were actually striking because farmers could resume working after dusk. Malaria fell to zero. And this structure actually spread across Texas first and in other areas of the United States. And they were also built in Italy. So just to give you an idea of how early farmers were aware of the importance of bats in agriculture. And in 1917, killing bats became illegal in Texas. And in Italy, it was pretty much the same situation, actually. The design of these bat towers was used in certain areas of Italy to counter malaria, and it worked. And a national law issued in 1939 protected all bat species. So it was forbidden to kill them. And you don't have to think that this was a sort of a biodiversity sensitive law. It has nothing to do with an ethic approach to conservation, just because people realized ever since that bats were important to agriculture and human health. So how many insects do bats eat? There are different variable numbers around. There are tests done in captivity showing that they may eat up to 25% of body mass in insects. But actually, in nature, data are even more encouraging, because we know that lactating bats may consume over 100% of their body mass in insects under natural conditions, sometimes reaching 150%, which means a lot of insects. So if you multiply this insectivorous action by the number of bats which may be roosting together in a colony, sometimes thousands of individuals, you can start realizing how bats may be important in terms of pest controlling action. Today, we have evidence that bats eat a lot of pest insects in agriculture, and we can ascertain that by using a modern approach, which is the DNA metabarcoding analysis. So to make a long story short, we have the possibility of screening bat feces for DNA presence of prey, and we can identify to species many of the typical prey of bats. 20, 30 years ago, we used to work in a completely different way. You have to actually dissect feces under a microscope and recognize small fragments of insects, which was really very complicated. And obviously, the taxonomic resolution of this operation was way more coarse. But nowadays, actually using DNA metabarcoding, we can have a sort of complete checklist of what bats eat, what's on a bat menu of a single night. And this is how we may come up with a very high taxonomic resolution to better assess the importance of bats in agriculture. Here, just an example of what Miniopterus crabbersii, one of the species occurring in Europe, may do in terms of pest consumption. And I had the pleasure of taking part in this study, and it was actually amazing to see how many pest insects are eaten by this species. Yes, this is the slide I was referring to. Actually, Miniopterus crabbersii is very interesting species. It's not a typical farmland species, so it's not one of those species you would expect to find in farmland. It's a cave species, normally associated with caves and sort of more natural environments, but they move a lot, and they can also reach farmland, and they eat a lot of pest insects. So we found that 22 major pest species across agricultural sites in Europe were actually consumed by these species. And it's especially interesting to see how, and this is a property which we'll find later in other species, different pest species may be tracked over time. This is one of the important properties of bats in agriculture, their capacity of tracking peaks of pests, which may seasonally change over time. And if a predator is capable of tracking these peaks and keeping pests at bay depending on their sudden appearance, obviously this will amplify the pest suppression that the predator will provide. And this is exactly the case with bats. Bats have a range of different foraging strategies depending on the species. Okay, so I don't want to explore details of this, but you know that bats find a way in the dark and identify prey using a biosonar, so they broadcast echolocation calls, which are normally ultrasonic pulses. They also differ in terms of wing shape, and these differences are species specific and allow different bat species to tackle different prey. Okay, so we are normally used to seeing bats catching prey on the wing in flight, but there are other bats which are capable of doing amazing things. For example, such as picking up flies from the walls of stables, okay, and being able to provide their ecosystem services even inside stables. So the range of different species and range of different strategies that bats use for foraging is actually especially important because they will be able to tackle a range of pest species and be especially important in farm and in agriculture. So far, I told you about direct effect of bats as predators, but there are also sublethal effects. And this is, not particularly well known, but I think it's worth talking about this as well. I told you that bats produce ultrasound. Actually, they shout ultrasound. And this is okay as long as they encounter deaf prey. Okay, but there are certain prey items which developed tympanic organs, so hearing organs, and they can use these organs to evade bat attacks. Only a handful of bat species are capable of prey upon these sensitive species. Still, this is sort of countermeasure taken by some prey in response to bat predation. But actually, even when this sensitive prey encounter bat species which are not capable of prey upon them directly, the sole emission of ultrasound will have an adverse effect on this prey. For example, they will not be eaten, but still they will not be able to reproduce as successfully because their reproductive activity will be disturbed by the presence of bats. So just having bats around, even bats which are not capable of prey upon these species, will exert a detrimental effect on the prey, which will sort of manifest that their fear, let's use this sort of a little bit stretched words, towards the predator. Nowadays, we actually talk about the ecology of fear, the effect that the predator may have on their prey, even if there is no actual predation going on. And there are colleagues working around the world on this topic. What they are using echolocation called playback, and they've seen that depending on the intensity and frequency of this broadcast, pest prey will actually be disturbed in a different way. And in areas where echolocation calls are especially frequent, you will have a lower presence of pests or a less successful reproduction of pests. In any case, you will have sort of indirect pesticide effect, let's put it this way, even if no pest species is actually consumed. An issue which has received some attention in the scientific literature is whether bats may actually control arthropod pests. As an ecologist, I'm particularly sensitive to this aspect because, to me, consuming pests may not, automatically mean to control pests. You have a control if the predator is capable of controlling the number of its prey, so that, for example, whenever a peak in their prey occurs, the predator will be able to increase foraging activity and suppress that peak. Okay, so it's a matter, if you want, of capacity by the predator of tracking peaks in insect abundance, including prey abundance. And yeah, this is actually the case with many bat species. We have a mounting evidence that bats are able to control pest prey. This example is not taken from agriculture, it's actually taken from forestry. This insect is the processionary moth. The adults are moths, are flies. They fly, and they lay eggs on pine trees. And the eggs develop into larvae, which are a nuisance to humans, and are also super harmful to plants as well. Well, this is a study done in France, which show that the number of larvae encountered on the following year was actually related to the levels of bat activity recorded in previous years, okay? So the higher bat activity in year one, the lower number of larvae on the plants in year two. And this is actually a fantastic evidence that bats may actually control pest insects and not just consume them. We have several other examples. This is an example from Catalonia, from Spain. In this case, in Delta del Ebro Regional Park, Catalonian colleagues, they set up bat boxes to increase the number of bats around, and they successfully did so that the number of Pipistrellus pygmaeus, soprano pipistrelles, increased over time. And this increase actually nicely matches with a decrease in number of rice stems infested. Again, showing a direct effects of the predator on the occurrence of prey, but also on the damage made to plants, which I think is especially interesting. Okay. An Italian study here, what we found in this study was that bats may actually fly around free-ranging livestock and feed on insects, which actually feed on the livestock blood. These insects are not only a nuisance, they're also important in terms of decrease in productivity of livestock. And bats may actually forage around livestock, decreasing the number of insects present. And what's fascinating in this case is that up to a certain level, the number of bats around, well, bat activity increased according to the number of livestock heads within a herd. Up to a certain extent, bats are capable of increasing their activity and likely their pesticide activity around livestock, depending on the number of heads present. Increasing bat diversity in bat communities or protecting bat biodiversity is also very important. This is a Portuguese study I had the pleasure to take part in a couple of years ago. What we found, this is set in Portugal, what we found was that, again, for the processionary moth, the higher bat diversity and abundance, the lower the number of pine processionary moths recorded in their foraging areas, which tells you that we should protect rich bat communities if we want to magnify the pest control effect exerted by bats. US study, one of the groundbreaking studies we had, showing that, it was published in Science a few years ago, showing that bats do a fantastic job in the US in terms of controlling pests. And this translates into a very important economic benefit, okay? So colleagues in the US, they managed to come up with very striking figures of around $22.9 billion per year in terms of ecosystem service delivery provided by bats, okay? The range was pretty large. Obviously, these are gross estimates, so ranging from 3.7 up to 53 billion US dollars. So it's gross simplification, but still these figures would be still huge, even if halved or quartered. So there is no doubt that bats do us a big favor in terms of ecosystem service delivery and associated financial economical gain, okay? What we do today to better understand the positive effects of bats, but also birds in agriculture, is to use so-called exclusion experiments. So basically what we do, we, thanks to nets, we can exclude bats from certain plots of a given cultivation. And we can control what happens to that place, since bats cannot get access to that place, compared to a plot of similar size, which is left exposed to bat predation. And after a certain number of days, you can actually check the level of damage made to plants in both conditions and compare between these two situations. And there is no doubt that in most studies so far carried out, the advantage that bats provide to agriculture is striking, because the damage made by bats to exposed plots the damage made by pests to exposed plots is way lower than the one recorded in places where we exclude bats from the scene. Okay, And you can obviously also translate this action into economic benefit. Just to give you an example, this is a study that we published a couple of years ago. Here we are in a organic cultivation orchard of apples in North Italy. And we did exactly this. We carried out an exclusion experiment. So we covered certain parts of the orchard and we left an equivalent part completely exposed to bats. And actually, we found that one of the big pests of apple orchard, colin, was successfully controlled for by bat predation, translating into a significant financial benefit for the farmers. Okay, so far so good, but ecology is complex by definition. And whenever we look at ecological processes, we should look at a range of different factors. And one of the important factors is habitat heterogeneity, which is something sometimes we tend to dismiss. Okay, in farmland, you have several levels of heterogeneity. For example, spatial heterogeneity, the complexity of system at landscape level generated by hedgerow networks, by tree lines, small ponds, canals, and so on. So all these elements increase the, say, natural aspects of farm landscapes, likening them to a natural situation. Also temporal heterogeneity, something super important. Okay, just rotating cultures may create a kind of heterogeneous patterns which are very important for biodiversity presence and associated ecosystem services, of course. And again, multiple scales are also important. So a single hedgerow may be very important, as much as a landscape which is made of forest patches coupled with cultivated fields and so on. So the complexity of the system is not only recognized in terms of large scale, but we need multiple scale of analysis to fully understand the different degrees of complexity and why this is important. So these are bat-friendly landscapes versus bat-unfriendly landscapes. Okay, it's just a very simple representation of how a hedgerow network may help bats. Hedgerows actually are used by bats to navigate into an otherwise hostile landscape matrix. They're also used for foraging, but one of the important properties of hedgerows is they're actually followed by bats. So if you want to lead bats to a certain area, having this hedgerow network would be very important to favor the presence of bats and the associated predation effect that they will exert. So, so far, I hope I was clear in saying that the way we manage farmland is very important for bats, and having bats around is very important for farmland. So it's actually a win-win strategy if we manage to create a farmland which is friendly to bats, as much as bats will be capable of being present in farmland with a high diversity in a yield condition to provide their ecosystem services, especially insectivity. And we have evidence from organic farming that actually this is the case. Organic farmland tends to host higher levels of bat activity and greater richness of bat communities. And obviously, this will be very important in terms of bat predation of pests in these systems. Okay, so again, this is really a win-win strategy where if we manage to have a side which is friendly to bats, then bats will pay off in terms of pest predation. And the heterogeneity I talked about before, I think is well exemplified by this study we published some years ago, showing that even forest specialist bat species may actually feed on agricultural pests. Here we are in a splendid place in central Italy. This is the Abruzzo, Lazio, and Molise National Park. Is one of these the most important national park in Europe. And the study was done in a old growth stand of beech forest. And we expected to find these bats to be important for forest pests, but what was striking actually is that part of their diet was made of agricultural pests. And this is possible because bats move a lot to reach their foraging sites. So if you have forest around, and well-preserved forest, they will be able to leave the forest, reach the nearby farmland, and prey on insects, including pests. Okay, so back to the idea that an alternation of cultivations and small forest patches creates the ideal conditions for bats and farmland. Well, this is, I think, a very good example that this is the case. The presence of forest may encourage bat predation in farmland, even if the bat species present are forest species and not the kind of species you would expect typically in farmland. Okay, let's move on to a point which I think is very important in this context. There is no doubt that pesticides pose risks to bats. Okay, pesticides may reach bats in a range of ways. Bats forage quite often in intensively farmed areas, so they are exposed to pesticides. We can have oral ingestion, dermal absorption, and inhalation. And bats have high energy needs, which will mean they will intake a lot of food, which will correspond to high pesticide ingestion. And they also store a lot of fat. Bats of temperate regions, they hibernate, so they seasonally store a lot of fat. And this is especially dangerous because they can also accumulate lipophilic toxins, which will be released during arousal at the end of hibernation in one go, getting intoxicated by pesticides. Bats are also social animals, and they form these large colonies, not only self-grooming, but also social grooming. So they lick each other to clean mutually their fur, may result in an ingestion of residues from fur and wings if bats are contaminated. And they also have large, thin, and vascularized wings, which unfortunately are a way for efficient dermal absorption. We already know from several studies that one of the effects of pesticides on bats is impairing their echolocation capacities, which is obviously a fatal strike to these animals because their entire life revolves around echolocating. So what happens if we may make farmland apparently attractive to bats? Okay, attractive to bats, but not well suited to host them. That will turn farmland into a deadly trap. And this is something that ecologists call an ecological trap. What I'm saying is that, if we say, for example, provide a lot of bat boxes and increase roost availability in a farm landscape, but then we don't act on mitigation of factors which may normally kill bats, we'll end up attracting bats from the surroundings and having them in an area which will be a sink in the long run, killing these animals and not only damaging farmland by itself, but also making an ecological damage to the areas in the surroundings. So with my colleagues, dealt with these aspects of ecological traps in general for bats and ecological traps in farmland in the specific context of farmland. And obviously, this is not completely supported in terms of the scientific evidence, but it's a very high potential risk, which should consider carefully. As long as in farmland we still have free-ranging biological invaders such as domestic cats, we have winter beans killing thousands of bats sometimes. We have roosts, artificial roosts, which are attractive to bats, but then what happens? We still have artificial lighting around and pesticides. So if we have this sort of perfect storm, there is a big risk we'll end up attracting bats into places which are apparently ideal, but actually they can kill bats. And we should really avoid that. Even just the risk of killing bats, I think, is something we cannot afford. Right. So this is just a summary of what I just said. You know, there are cues attracting bats, and these cues can be developed by people on purpose to make farmland more attractive. But then there are mechanisms which may kill bats or decrease their fitness, their reproductive success, and so on. And the consequences will be physiological alterations, mortality, and population declines. I think this is very important because whenever we try to mitigate human effects on any ecosystem, including farmland, you know, we should never just reason in terms of I'm going to work on a specific factor, okay? Because that's not how ecological systems work. We would really need a holistic approach, looking at the entire system in its complexity, because otherwise we really run the risk of not seeing the forest for the trees. So far, I told you that farmland can't lose bats. And again, there's a splendid study from the US showing this is the case. Unfortunately, a fungus which was imported to the US from Europe, the fungus which is on the cause of so-called white nose syndrome, killed millions of bats in North America, in the US and Canada, in the since 2006, okay? So we lost millions of bats. And we know that where the insectivorous action of bats is decreased, the reaction of farmers was to increase the use of pesticides. The study which was published last year in Science, by the way, by an economist, was not a biologist or conservation biologist, you know, very nicely correlated the increase in insecticide use with this decrease in bat presence. And which is particularly concerning, it was also related to an increase in infant health degradation, with an increase in loss of human newborns. Okay, so I think this study has two take-home messages which are concerning. The first one is that there is a relationship between insecticide use and loss of human infants, which is per se, I think, quite concerning. And the other important point is that we cannot take the luxury of losing important ecosystem components such as insect-eating bats, because this will directly or indirectly affect our own species. And I think this is really a big take-home message. And when I speak of losing bat species, I'm not just talking about rare species which receive a lot of conservation attention, but I'm also talking about common species. Most studies nowadays highlight the importance of generalist common bat species in terms of ecosystem service deliverers, because it's common species which are more likely to act as regulators of pest populations. You need to have a lot of predators to have a tangible effect of predation on pest insects in agriculture, in forests, and elsewhere. And common species are those that, being abundant, will also shift between different prey when their stable food is not available. So they are super flexible, and they can cope with, sort of changing scenario in prey occurrence, including pest insects. Please bear in mind that common doesn't mean safe. We have a lot, unfortunately, of very effective examples that we lost species which were super common back in the days. The passenger pigeon in North America is one of these cases. Okay, they were probably the most abundant vertebrate on Earth, but people wiped them out just by hunting. And this may happen to a lot of common species. So we published a paper just to highlight the importance that these common species have in ecology and why common doesn't mean safe, because even these common species are exposed to the insults of human action in all ecosystems. So my take-home messages today are that, first of all, bats are important in farmland. They suppress and control agricultural pests, and this is significant. Bat diversity boosts ecosystem services, so we should try to preserve as many bat species as possible. That richness is a goal if we want to make the most out of their action. And organic farmland is actually friendly to bats. And the other way around, we should consider the importance of this mutual relationship. improving farmland for bats is fine, but we are speaking of real improvements. Just setting up bat boxes or adding a few hedgerows around will not change things, or will even make things worse if we don't tackle the real problems behind this effect of agriculture. Reducing or taking out pesticides from the scene, for example, would be an ideal goal for having bat-friendly farmlands. And again, common species play a key role and need protection. So when we protect bats, we should not only concentrate on rare and endangered species. We should bear in mind that the real deliverers of ecosystem services are common species. What direction are we taking? Well, I'm not speaking about the US. I can speak about the EU, and I can tell you that unfortunately we are going towards something which is far away from what I told you about so far. And for example, also the attempt of the EU, the initial attempt of the EU to make EU farmland sort of more biodiversity friendly, reducing the amount of pesticides, has been watered down by further actions. So the overall situation is really concerning, and I think it's sort of global trend we should be really aware of. And that's it. So thanks very much for your attention. I'll be more than pleased to take questions during the Q&A time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rousseau. This idea of thinking holistically as a scientist, I think, is something we'll probably discuss, at the end of the session here in our question and answer session. But I think you've really queued this up in a way that creates a framework for how we need to think. And the value of bringing science into discussions on policy and so forth. So we really appreciate you kicking this session off with such insight. With that, I'm now going to segue to the next two speakers, actually. They complement each other beautifully. Joanne Baumgartner and Sam Earnshaw. Sam Earnshaw is a hands-on practitioner putting in place hedgerows that are integral to the support of ecosystem services. As the author of Hedgerows and Farmscaping for California Agriculture, a resource guide for farmers, I think in the second edition, Sam Earnshaw has done acclaimed work for protecting ecological balance and increasing farm productivity. So we're really looking forward to his talk as well. And then Joanne Baumgartner is the co-founder and executive director of the Wild Farm Alliance. Joanne is a passionate advocate for land stewardship, working directly with farmers to adapt practices that support the restoration of riparian buffers, protecting waterways across farms, improving water quality, reducing erosion, and protecting aquatic and terrestrial species. She works with conventional and organic farmers and has been a staunch advocate before the National Organic Standards Board to uphold and enhance the integrity of organic standards behind the USDA organic food label. She advocates for protecting native ecosystems under the organic standards, having written proposed draft native ecosystem guidance for organic certifiers. Both Sam Earnshaw and Joanne Baumgartner have farmed for over a decade as organic farmers, so they know what of they speak. And let me turn it over to you now. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for inviting us. I think Sam is going to give the first presentation, so I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. So I'm talking about integrating nature into the food production system. Next slide. These are some of the ways that farmers that we've been working with have used vegetation, planting hedgerows, grass waterways, filter strips, riparian plantings, and windbreaks and beetle banks. Next. Here's a native plant hedgerow on a vegetable farm in California. Next one. A grassed waterway along a strawberry farm. Next. Filter strips, which is a strip of grasses usually between a crop and a wild area, or this is in this case next to a hedgerow. Next one. Riparian plantings along drainages and rivers and creeks. Those are cottonwoods that are barely 2 years old planted. Right. Next one. Windbreaks, very commonly used in areas along edges of farms with a diversity of species. Those are redwoods there, a lot of redwoods. Next one. And beetle banks, which beetles really like the grasses. It's just kind of overlooked predator of insects. Okay. Next one. So the functions of these various plantings are diverse. It's soil erosion control, weed control, beneficial insect and pollinator habitat, wildlife habitat. They sequester carbon. There's non-point source water pollution reduction, air quality, dust control, barriers, riparian stabilization, windbreak and climate modification, aesthetic value. A lot of times farmers say how much they like going back to their farms when they see these different kinds of shrubs and flowers, and economic returns, which we'll touch on in a minute, and then just generally the increase in local and regional biodiversity. So there's many functions of these various plantings. Okay, next. And there's when it comes to buffering climatic extremes, many of these same functions really help with that, protecting soils, increasing water infiltration, erosion control, keep creating habitat and corridors for the beneficial insects and pollinators and wildlife whose habitats are changing, moving north in a lot of cases, sequestering carbon, protecting from winds and climatic extremes, and in general, increasing biodiversity. Next. Everybody seems to have heard of hedgerows in England. At one point, they had 500,000 miles of hedgerows. Wild Farm Alliance has a project, Hedgerows to the Moon and Back, which is 500,000 miles. But hedgerows go back to the Bronze Ages. They were used for property line and wind protection and fuel and food resources. In the 90s, early 90s, an organization in California called the Community Alliance with Family Farmers started doing some research on almond and walnut orchard, the biological integrated orchard systems, and studying how the native vegetation, native plants actually were a habitat for a lot of beneficial insects. And so that has spread. In 1996, we planted our first native plant hedgerow down on the central coast of California, and we've been kind of planting them ever since. We've done it over 125 hedgerows in our area. Next slide. So up on the left, there's a picture of this cotton and almond farm in near Fireball, California, the Central Valley, and this is what it looked. We went out there and planted a hedgerow. You can see down there on the left and right are what the plants look like a little later. Next slide. And they grow pretty quickly in 1 year with water, which is a crucial thing. You can see we have a drip line there. We put compost in every hole, and just water is really the key feature. Water is the cause of failure, lack of water. And but when they're watered, they get established after a while. If we have kind of normal weather patterns in most areas, they don't need to be watered after 3 years. In the Central Valley, it's a little different where the water table is really deeper. Next slide. This is the same hedgerow 8 years later. So you can see they really get well developed, and they have a lot of diversity. You can see there's high and low and show there's shrubs, there's trees. Next slide. And trees are a big component, can be a component of a hedgerow, not always, obviously, but in some places like that one we put oaks and some giant sequoias and valley oaks and things there. Next slide. Um, This is a slide of just what life is associated with oak trees. It's like the acorns, leaves, roots, and limbs and everything have a whole variety of insects associated with the good and the bad. The good ones like to eat the bad ones. And then there's all kinds of birds and small birds and owls and hawks, and then woodpeckers, and then lizards and snakes. So a tree has a really big ecosystem associated with it and provides ecosystem services. And so we encourage people to plant trees when they can. Next slide. You can also use very short shrubs. This is a vegetable farm, and they were that little border between the road and the farm was just a weed patch that they had to manage with herbicides or just physical getting rid of. And a lot of the native plants have short varieties, and there's also these short flowers. A lot of those flowers are a yarrow plant, and there's also some sages and California lilacs in there. So this kind of, and the short hedgerow like that replaces the weeds and can prevent erosion as well. Next slide. This slide kind of shows how carbon is sequestered at a greater amount with a hedgerow there. That shrub on the left, the roots go deeper, and the number at the bottom is a higher number. On the right is a cultivated field, and there's not as much carbon sequestered there. And obviously, the cultivated field, the plant's taken out after a while too. Next slide. Just talking about the costs of it. Usually the plant costs in a hedgerow is from $1 to $4 a plant, or sometimes higher. And then our National Resource Conservation Service will provide $5.50. I think that's one of the numbers to per foot for a hedgerow, and that's a cost share number. We have a program here in California that called Healthy Soils, and they're providing $10 a foot. So basically, that's a good judge of what the cost might be. You know, if you look at this list of activities and materials down to the bottom, including maintenance fees, and that runs to about, $4 to $10 a foot. And so let's see. It's hard to estimate exactly, but it's 1,000-foot hedgerow could cost anywhere between $4,000 and $10,000. Okay, and then next slide shows these are some articles that have been some research done on the cost-benefit analysis of this. The hedgerows and the habitat plantings tend to help increase pollination and increase the pest services. There's a lot of research done on how the beneficial insects really control various pests, and then also reduce the use of pesticides, which is the goal of all of us. So it's a great technique for that. There's no silver blankets in any of this, silver bullets in any of this. But because as Jay mentioned, Joanne and I actually were married, and we had an organic farm for like over 15 years, and you never get 100%, and farmers know this, and so what we're doing is reducing the damage and increasing the yields and healthy things with these ecosystem services provided by these plantings. Okay, next slide. Having an array of different species gives you flowering periods over the whole year. If you just put one species out there, you're not going to get that. It gives insects places to shelter. It gives nectar and pollen. Next slide. This is just a slide showing this one of our strong past beneficial insects is the green lacewing. And on the right is a list of the 7 species that we planted in this hedgerow. And then on the left, at the bottom, it's from May to October. It shows how this lacewing used all these different species over that whole period from May to October. If there was just one of these species there, you would not get that kind of coverage or that kind of visitation. Next slide. And this is just a slide. There was research showing that the species, those are the species that we use. And on the right, there's this whole array of beneficial insects. Next slide. The pests, there's a whole array of pests, and these are all kind of food for these beneficial insects. The little slide out there on the right is actually an aphid that's been parasitized by a wasp, and those are called mummies, aphid mummies, and it's very common to see wasps, these tiny little, people say wasps, they say, oh, they're going to bite us. No, the wasps are these tiny little things, and they are able to just lay their eggs in an aphid, and then, so you see that pretty commonly. You look at a plant that's been visited by the wasp, you turn a leaf over, you'll see these aphid mummies. Next slide. Bees are attracted to a lot of these flowers. You get native bees and the honey bees. Next slide. A lot of literature has shown how bees really increase yield. So bringing bees into your field, that's increased pollination. And pollination doesn't just occur with bees either. It's also the beneficial insects. Next slide. This was an almond cotton. This was actually the same one. That's our hedgerow in the back there. You can see on the top slide. The farmer pays a beekeeper to bring in these hives, which he leaves there and then moves them around. Well, because our hedgerow was there and so many bees, like we had a plant out there that was so covered with bees you couldn't even see the leaf. It was coyote brush, a very common species. So the beekeeper said, I don't have to move my bees. And so he left them there and he decreased the cost to this farmer by thousands of dollars. So it was kind of an economic benefit that nobody ever even thought of or anticipated, but it was a real one, and it was real to this farmer. So he got 2 things here. He got his hedgerow, and then he got a financial boost by not having to pay out thousands of dollars for the bees because the beekeeper left them there. Okay, next slide. Birds. Joanne's going to talk a lot about birds, but birds eat all these rodents and rodents and insects and stuff. And next slide. They feed their young voraciously when they're nesting, and so a lot of times farmers say, "Oh, I hate birds. They come and damage our crops." Well, what Joanne has done and others have done a lot of work showing how important birds are to controlling pests. And yes, again, no silver bullets, and these flocking birds are the ones that cause the big trouble, but sometimes they eat a lot of insects too. So, like I said, there's no 100% solutions to any of this, and what we're bringing nature in to help us with these things. Next slide. Grasses, this is up on the left is a severely eroding ditch in Salinas. We went in and leveled it out and you can see on the right, there was drip tape, and we seeded in with a variety of species, different native grass species and some yarrow and stuff. And then on the left bottom is we covered it with straw to keep the moisture in. And then on the right, it turned into a really nice, well-developed grassed waterway. Next slide. So using perennial grasses, which is what we did and do in these grass waterways, you can see this slide just shows the rooting depth of a perennial grass versus an annual. And perennials are there all the time. They'll kind of die back in the summertime, but their roots are still there. And then, when the rains come or in the winter, when the irrigation comes on, then they turn green and they're up and running again. And those are very effective in helping control erosion in ditches. Okay, next slide. This is a publication that we did with the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. It's available on their website. It's also on the Wild Farm website. And on the right is a book that Joanne and wrote over there. And she's going to talk more about this on beneficial birds. But these are two very useful guides. We hand them out to farmers and they really like them. So that's pretty much my presentation. The next slide is just the ending slide here. And that's it. I don't know if I took 20 minutes or not.
Thank you so much. A little slow on the start, but it was worth the wait. We appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Joanne, you're up.
Hi, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm trying to open my video and okay, now here we are. Yay. Okay, and I'm going to start my presentation. Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi everybody. Joanne Baumgartner, and glad to be here. It was a great presentation on bats. So exciting to learn all about that. And Sam and I, he said we were married, but we are married still. And in any case, so I'm going to talk about advancing holistic solutions and with nature, and it's related to our mission, which is promoting a healthy, viable agriculture that protects and restores wild nature. I'm the executive director of Wild Farm Alliance and have been working with Wild Farm Alliance for 25 years. So I'm going to talk about our vision, the biodiversity crisis a little bit, ag as a solution. I'm also going to discuss what birds eat and like rodents and insects, and how do you support them with nest boxes and planting habitat, and how you can discourage some of the few pest birds, and then designing a farm to support birds. Sam mentioned a little bit, we have this bold vision, 2050 vision, where we want to see 1 million nest boxes and purchase on US farms. We want to see hedgerows to the moon and back, which isn't that much when you think about the UK having 500,000, the same amount. Yeah. But it does take effort to put those hedgerows in. And we want to see riparian areas be restored, 100,000 miles. So insects are towards the bottom of the food chain, and they are so important for so many organisms, including us and our food security. And we heard a little bit before that there's insect declines, and it's from many factors, but over on the right, you can see it's from ag intensification, not leaving enough for nature, and also chemical pesticides and fertilizers. Birds are on the decline. Some kinds of birds are more on the decline than others, like grassland birds have declined about 50-something% since 1970s. And mammals, most of the mammals on the US are us, and livestock. If you look at this graph on the right, domesticated livestock are red. And in 1850, over on the left part of that graph, they and humans, which are orange, were about that we had about the same amount of biomass as wild animals, both in wild lands and in the oceans. But that's changed, and now there's somewhere between only 4 to 5% of wild mammals on the planet. So looking at agriculture, the continental US has about 60% of it in agriculture. Some of it's cropland and a lot of it is pasture and rangeland. So there's an opportunity to help bring things back into a more functioning world by incorporating nature in the farm. It was good to hear from Dr. Russo that there are lots of win-win situations and how we can support bats and birds and other wild organisms, and also agriculture can benefit, but there's also ecological traps, and pesticides are one of them, and some other issues. But we published this document to address 3 issues. One of them, pesticides, where we have this chart showing pesticides that the most used and or the most acreage in California, but a lot of these pesticides are used worldwide, are listed, both conventional pesticides and organic pesticides. And then we look at the risk to birds, whether it's acute risk or chronic risk. And we also look at wide scale effects, like environmental effects, and then human health. And the way we work with farmers is we like to share information with them and not tell them what to do, but tell them to consider this information as they make their decisions. Farming is not easy. It's really stressful. There's so many different factors to weigh. And we, as you'll see in my slides coming up, that we really try and help farmers get away from pesticides, but at the same time recognize that they are being used. So let's start to use the ones that are safer for birds and for the environment and for themselves. In this document, we also looked at a couple other things related to bird safety. One of them has to do with cover crops, which are great in farms. They help build soil. They can support beneficial insects when they're flowering. And when they get terminated, sometimes there's nests that get destroyed. So we addressed that issue in this publication, and we also addressed putting nest boxes near roads or away from roads, and have from huge amount of data through Cornell Ornithology and partnering with Brianna Martinico from UC, University of California. We found that putting nest boxes near busy roads or even not so busy roads, but roads where there's traffic is not a good thing. There's less nest success compared to farm roads. They're fine to put them up. We've also published this document. Sam kind of teed us up talking about the different beneficial insects that occur in hedgerows. Well, we looked at 10 of the major crops in California and what their pests are, who the predator insects and parasitoids, the wasps and flies, attack those major pests, and then what habitat they can plant, hedgerows and other kinds of infield habitat. We have in the back of this document, there's 50 different plants that can be used that are documented supporting beneficials, but there's thousands of native plants in California and so many more across the world that we need to know who supports which plant supports which beneficials, across our world. And the research is lacking. We're, just trying to get there as fast as we can. Sam showed you this document, which I'm co-author with Sarah Cross and Sasha Heath, and about managing beneficial birds and pest birds. And in it, we document 120 different pest management studies related to beneficial birds. And are they beneficial? And 90% of those studies showed that yes, they are beneficial. About 30% of them, the researchers dug really deep and documented that it's not just that they reduce the pest insects, but they also reduce crop damage and or they increase crop growth and or yield. So that's cool. And some of the studies also looked at habitat. When you put in habitat supports birds, and others looked at how putting in nest boxes support birds and this pest control. The overwhelming majority of songbirds are beneficial during the nesting season because they're eating all these insects, just like Dr. Russo talked about with bats. And chickadees and bluebirds will feed their young about 150 to 170 times per day, which is incredible. But when you think about it, there's two parents. In the summer, there's 15 hours of daylight, and they're just going back and forth every 10 minutes or so. So over a 3-week nesting period, that is a lot of insects that they're eating. You might think that this is a new thing to study avian pest control, but it's not. Back in as 1817 and through 1936, there was almost 1,500 studies published about economic ornithology. And in 1885, the USDA actually funded the study of it and supported a lot of these studies. But then as we get into the 30s, the studies are trickling down, and that has to do with pesticides coming to the fore and birds being forgotten. But actually not forgotten, because there's a resurgence of research and with DNA analysis that the same kind that was discussed with bats. And this is Dr. Julie Jedlicka, who studied bluebirds in vineyards for 10 years, and she found lots of cool stuff. One was 350% more caterpillars are removed near nest boxes, but with using DNA analysis also found that some of the main pests in vineyard, sharpshooters and leafhoppers, but it also a pest of us, mosquitoes, were eaten by these bluebirds. Dr. Sasha Heath found that in walnuts, birds, woodpeckers, but some other birds too, helped reduce codling moth, which is the worm in the apple, by 35% in the overwintering stage of the codling moth. They spin their cocoons on the barks of trees, and it's the job of these birds to find them. And then I studied birds eating the same pest in apple orchards, and so did others all across the world, because as you could imagine, people grow apples everywhere. And anywhere from 13% up to 99% of the overwintering populations of calling moth were eaten by birds. Here, this is a study looking at barn swallows and how researchers found that 18% of their feces that were collected under their nests contained oil seed rape pests. This is Sarah Cross's study looking at how birds help reduce alfalfa weevils by 33%. And it was better, this happened more often when there was at least 2 trees next to the fields. Dr. Megan Garfinkel looked at this system of kale, hedgerows next to kale fields, and found on average the birds were removing 24% of the insect sentinel prey, experimental prey, but some fields it was up to 80-something%. This is Dr. Alyssa Limpy, and she was looking at strawberry fields, in organic and conventional strawberry fields, and found that when you have semi-natural habitat like hedgerows and other kinds of habitat around and on the farm, that you're going to decrease crop damage and mitigate food safety risk, which is a big deal that growers around fresh fruit and vegetable growers have to address. Also, when you have this habitat, you're promoting beneficial bird species and their communities. And what was really interesting is she found that if those organic monocultures that didn't have habitat, if they added it, they would decrease their cost by 23%. And that has to do some with when there's these huge monocultures, birds come in from the edges, and even though they're insectivorous birds, there's hardly anything else for them to eat, and they eat strawberries. This is Dr. Matt Johnson, who's been studying barn owls with his students for many years, maybe 10 years now. And he, one of the cool results they found was a single barn owl family can remove almost 3,500 rodents in a year. They don't, if there's a huge population of rodents, it's hard for them to get it under control. But if it's a low level of rodents, they can help keep it low, keep it to a manageable number. So how do you support birds? They need food, they need shelter, water, and nesting sites. We've created a tool for California, but that's an Excel tool to address that issue. But we are also right now in the middle of creating an online tool that will be for California. That's where we are, and also the Midwest and up in New York. And anyways, what it does is look at where are the opportunities on the farm. This is for conservationists that work with growers and for growers themselves. Where can they put habitat, and what kinds of management practices can they use to help make sure that the farm is safe for birds? So it has a pesticide element to it. They get better score if you have using organic pesticides or really not using pesticides. But then another piece of it is it rates habitat. And this is one of the results of that tool where, for instance, picking, Sam and I really love oak trees. I'm showing you these oak trees with the genus Quercus. The darker these colors, the more beneficial. So this data right here is from Cornell Ornithology's huge database that we are using, that is showing how oak trees really support just general habitat of birds. They also provide lots of food, and they also are great for nesting. This caterpillar means that oak trees support lots of caterpillars that birds love to eat, and yeah, more stuff, but I'll kind of keep moving. We've published this document. These are all downloadable for free at our website, wildfarmalliance.org. And this one is about nest boxes and nesting structures. We have one for California and one for the Midwest, and but a lot of the information is applicable anywhere. Besides bluebirds, these birds will use that nest box. And not all birds use nest boxes. Birds that in nature use cavities in trees will use nest boxes. So the Western bluebird, in this document, we show like what do they eat and where do they forage, and how far away to put their nest boxes, and what do their eggs look like. And if a farmer at the end of the year still hasn't figured out, well, who used that nest box, they can open up the box and see that there was a nest, and this is the bluebird nest. But if it was a tree swallow, it would have feathers on it. And if it was a chickadee, it would have moss. And if it was a wren, it would have sticks. And so our document goes into detail about that. And having nest boxes is so fun to watch. Watch the birds go in and out. And there's a whole protocol in our document about if you're going to look in a nest box, you have to take a quiz and from Cornell and learn how to be safe around them. This is another study just showing that bluebirds and gray tits, which are related to our chickadees, helped with apple yields and increased when the nest boxes were in this orchard, increased yields by 66%. This is Cornell's Nest Watch website, and that's where you can download nest box plans. I have it crossed out here that we have to monitor the nest boxes, and our document also goes a lot into that. And where part of the monitoring is to keep out pest birds that are non-native, like the house sparrow and the European starling. We also go into ecological traps and say you should not put nest boxes up near where cats are, or near compost where there might be rodents, because rodents will eat. If they can get in a nest box, they will, and there's lots of ways to make those nest boxes safe. So that is part of it. I wanted to just briefly address it. A few birds give all birds a bad name, and before we started working on this topic, so often farmers would say to me, "Oh, let me tell you about this terrible bird story I have." But now they are rethinking that. Yes, birds can be a really big problem, but we really, just like insects, we can't just say birds. We have to say, is it pest birds or beneficial birds, beneficial insects, or pest insects? And so these birds right here, these 5 birds are pests, and some of them are flocking birds. Like this is a flocking bird, the brewer's blackbird. But look, she's got all these insects in her mouth. So what we promote is to be welcoming to birds when they're nesting, but then later on you might have to manage them. And these big flocks of birds over here on the left that are moving into a vineyard, that flock is looking for a lot of food. And they're not, when they're flying over this hedgerow, which is this same hedgerow, that they might stop and hang out there for a little while, but that's not gonna keep them going. So hedgerows, sometimes birds do live in hedgerows and can move out and eat a little bit on the edges. But if you have a big roadway in between, this is a lot of non-cover for like a sparrow that might cause a little damage. The sparrow is not a flocking bird. So there are ways to deal with that. And then more stories about these birds. Farmers think are pests, but it actually, there's a study in New Zealand showing that crows help to eat the pests that are in the nuts that are left after harvest, and really help growers save money by doing that. And then European starlings in Europe, there's a study showing how that they did the same thing in olive trees. The olives that were left on the trees after harvest could harbor pest insects, and the starlings go in there. They evolved with the olives, and they go in there and reduce those pests. Here's Sarah Cross, who studied falcons, New Zealand falcons in New Zealand, and she found that by having falcons around, they reduced pest birds by almost 80% and grape damage by 70%, and saved growers lots of money. Sarah is on our board. And in this study, this is in Michigan, they put up kestrel nest boxes and saved growers, or it was estimated that if cherry growers, this is in cherry orchards, they estimated that if all cherry growers put up those boxes, it'd save millions of dollars. These growers did save a lot of money. And it was similar to what Dr. Russo was talking about with ecology of fear, because these kestrels are fast. They can catch pest birds, but mostly their diet is little rodents. However, just having them there really kept the pest birds away, or reduced. So how do you design a farm that makes the most of the birds' foraging strategies? Because they are foraging at different, some of them are fly catching, some of them are aerial diving or ground foraging or gleaning and foraging from trees. So if you have different kinds of diversity on the farm, like hedgerows, and have them connected, which makes it safer for birds to move, have not just the crop, but pastures, and if they're lucky enough to have riparian areas, to make sure there's riparian habitat and other non-cropped areas, and growing a crop diversity, all these things help to support different kinds of opportunities for birds. And then you get a diversity of birds, and you also get a diversity of beneficial insects, which is another talk. And so I'm going to end with that. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Fantastic work. And maybe we can talk a little later about what organic needs to do to, as we say, engage in continuous improvement to ensure we get the kind of diversity that supports the ecosystem and native habitat. So now we're going to segue to beavers. A lot of people have asked us, why would a pesticide organization be working on beavers? Well, a week or two ago, Dr. Rousseau brought a study to us that showed that, and it's featured on our website this morning or today, that we see increases in bat populations where there are healthy beaver populations. So that's queuing our next speaker up, Tony Abel, who is the chair of the Southeast Beaver Alliance, where he focuses on how beavers can serve as critical partners in the restoration of streams and wetlands to promote environmental health. He is a retired wetlands program chief at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and actively engaged in environmental advocacy in the Southeast. He also serves on the board of the Southeastern Trust for Parks and Land, where he helps to conserve natural landscapes and build public parks that benefit local communities and ecosystems. And Tony, we're really, really happy to have you with us, and we welcome you to this presenter spot. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jay. Let's see, let me pull this thing up here. All right, here we're in business. All right, yeah, thank you, Jay. Yes, I was at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for 35 years. A lot of that time, the most fun parts of my job was doing stream restoration work, and during that, doing stream restoration and wetland restoration, I came across this idea that beavers can be very strong partners in helping with restoration. For the first part of that career, I was using this science of fluvial geomorphology to put meanders back in rivers and reconnect rivers with their floodplains, and that was using lots of heavy equipment. And partway through that, I read some books that taught me that beavers can also be a tool in the toolbox in addition to the bulldozers. And being at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, I'll just go ahead and answer the question. Yes, I went through quite a number of government shutdowns, and they can be painful. So yes, then I started the Southeastern Beaver Alliance. I retired in 2022 and started the Southeast Beaver Alliance in 2024, partly because I wanted to stay engaged with the science. And I found a number of other NGOs and academians and local governments that also wanted to be part of this alliance. And so what I want to do for you today is just give you a very broad overview. I'm going to touch on the surface of the beaver movement. It is a very strong movement happening across the country, led by the what is the Beaver Institute. I'll talk about them more later. And the ecosystem services of beavers. I'll give an example, one of the examples from EPA, where I learned how the value of beavers. I'll talk a little bit about coexistence with beavers and controlling their flooding. I'll touch on the states and a little bit of federal legislation that is happening in this strong beaver movement. And then SEBA, the Southeast Beaver Alliance, SEBA, I'll call it from here forward, talk about some of the comments that we're making on policy documents. And then at the end, I'll talk about BeaverCon, which, yes, there is a beaver conference that happens. A lot of people are interested to find that out. So if you want to do some reading, some of the books, the ones that influenced me while I was EPA was this one called Eager by Ben Goldfarb. Saving the Damned is a little more academic because it's written by a geologist. And over to the far right is one called Once They Were Hats. And that speaks to the fact that in America, we systematically trapped out all the beavers across the country. It was really the first gold rush. Beaver pelts were used as money. It was a strong economic movement. So here's the range that beavers had historically. They were estimated back in those times between 100 and 400 million of them before this fur trade. And in that fur trade, the Europeans had already trapped out the beavers in most of Europe. And this movement, by the way, is strong in Europe as well. So we were trapping them out to make top hats for Europeans. We were shipping shiploads of furs back across to Europe. We trapped them almost to extinction. And now we're estimating there are between 10 million and 15 million beavers on the landscape. And part of the movement is trying to help them return to this historic range. So getting into the ecosystem services portion of this, one of our colleagues at SEBA has a paper out that's not yet published, so you're getting this hot off the press, where they look through the literature to find the ecosystem services of beaver and found out that they have pretty much 21 strong ecosystem services they provide. And since you can see in the middle of this one, there's quite a benefit to agriculture that I'll get into a little bit more. And they looked at these on the benefits at the local, regional, and global scales. The authors of that, by the way, are Colin Van Buren and Emily Fairfax, Emily is a name that you hear quite prominently in this beaver movement. So a little bit on the ecological services. Of course, we know they build aquatic habitats, they build wetlands, they filter stormwater, which is relevant to this conversation. The stormwater, the beaver ponds can filter pesticides, they can filter nutrients from farms, they can filter urban stormwater. I lead tours near my house in Atlanta on some urban beaver ponds. They can help with flood attenuation, wildfire control. You see in this slide how this wildfire out west moved across the landscape, but could not burn the beaver wetland. So that provided a refuge for animals and a front line for fire managers. This beaver movement is very strong out west because they help with fire management. I mentioned drought management, holding water on the landscape where we used to have it run off quickly, recharging the aquifers of the West. And a number of farmers and ranchers are recognizing that holding that water on the landscape will regreen their farms, regreen their pastures. Joanne, you were talking about birds. It's just a little simple study that a colleague had, one of her colleague at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, Sandra Clinton, had one of her PhD students was just take the Merlin app and go to a beaver pond or several beaver ponds and then go up and downstream of the beaver pond. So the comparison here is birds at the beaver pond, and birds, I think it was about 1,000 feet up and downstream. And you see on the left at the beaver pond, there were about 14 more species, unique species that they found in the beaver pond itself. Now, I said I would talk a little bit about my experience at EPA. So I was telling you we would do restoration projects where we would return streams to their natural state after they've been damaged by humans. In this case, we had taken a healthy stream and historically had put it in a concrete channel. So the restoration for this project was to remove that concrete channel. And of course, at that time, not knowing about beavers, we used heavy equipment and took the concrete out. Used a lot of fossil fuels to do this restoration project. Put it on the ground, and this is the end product. So that's a relatively nice habitat there. You can have a few fish in there, and you can grow some fish and amphibians, and some birds and bats can use this. But then the beavers moved into this $1 million project. It cost $1 million to do this project with the bulldozers. The beavers moved in and made it a far greater ecological habitat than happened with the heavy equipment. You could grow a lot of fish and amphibians. The bats would like this. The birds would like this, and it made this fantastic habitat. So that really solidified my viewpoint change that we really need to use beaver in our put them as a tool in our stream restoration toolbox. So now let's talk just a minute about now when beavers become a problem, when they flood people's property, they flood infrastructure, they flood highways, they flood farm fields. We do have techniques now that we can use to help coexist with beavers. The approach up until recently has been that it was lethal management. They had to be killed and removed. We in the last 20 something years, we've started developing these systems where we use a pipe and fencing to control the water level of the pond. In this case, using these devices, humans can control the water level of the pond and not the beaver itself. And this would, if you lower it just a few feet or a small amount, the beavers can still stay there and provide their ecosystem services, but you can still control their water levels. These type things are called culvert fences with pipes, and pond levelers. So in this case, a pond leveler is where we put the pipe through the beaver dam. And you see where the pipe in the diagram there, where the pipe is going through the dam, that sets the new elevation of the dam rather than allowing the beaver to set the elevation. Therefore, we can control the flooding. We put a screen around the intake structure of the pipe, and that prevents the beavers from building a dam along the intake structure. And so this does truly help. These are becoming quite successful. Here's another one where it's fencing around a culvert. We've got a screen around it, and then a pipe going into that screen. And highway departments have a lot of problems, beavers clogging culverts. And so this is one technique there. Another one is another trapezoidal fencing structure that helps prevent the beavers from clogging this culvert. Here's just another example. I chose this picture because this is one of our SEBA members, Jenna Krugler. She's a PhD student at Clemson. She's studying the effectiveness of these beaver devices, and I use this slide mainly because this small woman is in the creek doing all the work while all these men are sitting around watching. So then there's tree wrapping. Many people have problems with the beavers chewing their trees. they're valuable ornamental trees. We can solve that problem as well with fencing to put around the trees. And so now I talked about the Beaver Institute, this larger national beaver organization, and I would call SEBA a partner or subsidiary of the National Beaver Institute. And they have this thing on their a program called Beaver Core, where people can be trained to install these flow devices. There's a number of I've talked to trappers that say these flow devices don't work, but a lot of times people that are not trained are putting them in and they don't work. So Beaver Core is a program that teaches us how to do this. I'm actually a student of that right now. So is the lady Jenna that I just showed the picture of. And it has this website that says find a professional. So you can go in and click these dots and it will give you the name of someone who has been through the Beaver Core training that knows how to install these. And what I'm hoping with Jenna there at Clemson going through the course, and me here in Atlanta, that we'll be able to add some flow device experts to this map by this time next year. And so now I want to move into a little bit, still talking about the strength of this beaver movement, that there's quite a bit of legislation going on. These Western states recognizing holding water on the landscape is very valuable to them for agriculture, for silviculture, for fire management, for drought management. So in Washington State, they are recognizing these as a protected species, and they need to balance beaver and human interest. Oregon has a couple of laws on the books that prioritize non-lethal management of beavers and recognizing their importance. Joanne, you were mentioning California. California has has established through their California Department of Fish and Wildlife a program, and I've learned that they were funding 12 positions for staff in this beaver restoration program, where they're trying to get beaver back on their historic habitat to help restore wetlands. And then moving to a little bit about our efforts at the Southeast Beaver Alliance. We've commented a great deal on these state wildlife action plans, and these action plans are a blueprint that the states use to manage their wildlife program. It also directs where their grants will be directed. And a term they use in these SWAPs, as we call them, state wildlife action plans, is species of greatest conservation need. And our comments from Southeast Beaver Alliance is to these SWAPs that are updated about every 10 years, is that they should be putting more into their state wildlife action plans about coexisting with beaver. A lot of states list them as nuisance species or to be eradicated, to be killed out. And we're trying to turn that tide to have them recognize that they are valuable species for restoration. We also put in our letters about these flow devices that many of them don't understand exist, that where they have flooding problems by beavers in their states, they can use these devices to use coexistence rather than lethal management. Another thing that we commented on, if any of you are aware of this national, this is a federal nationwide permit by the Corps of Engineers that you would apply for. These are streamlined permits. Like nationwide 27 is for restoration projects, for wetland and stream restoration projects. 14 is linear transportation projects where they cross highways, and 43 is for stormwater projects. In this new proposed rule for this nationwide permit that may come out in 26, they have changed the language. It's very favorable towards beaver, saying that harvesting beavers in the past caused the decline of beavers, and that they were the managers of the streams historically before the Europeans arrived in America and trapped them all out. And they go on to say that beavers could be part of these restoration projects, and we should be using them in addition to the bulldozers in our restoration projects. And now starting to wrap up just a little bit here, telling you a little bit about the strength of this movement. So the Beaver Institute in 2024 put on this conference called BeaverCon that my wife and I attended in Boulder, Colorado. So it had a very much a Western influence to the speakers. And at that conference, there were 41 states, four Canadian provinces, 7 countries in attendance, and there were about 450 people there. And some of the speakers there, I don't go to many conferences where the governor of the state talks. The governor came in and spoke about beaver habitat and drought management and how and wildfire management, how they are beneficial to Colorado. The USD Farm Services Administrator, Farm Services Administration Administrator was there to talk about beaver and the agriculture. I've already mentioned that a number of ranchers like the way that beavers rehydrate their pasture lands and rehydrate the aquifers on their farms. The California Secretary of Natural Resources was there to talk about that new program that I had already mentioned, where they are trying to put beavers back on the landscape in California. And then there were a number of Native American tribes there that spoke. The vice chair of one of the tribes of the Lakota, talking about the coexistence with beavers and their historical relationship with beavers. And then finally, I just want to put in a plug for the next coming, if anybody's wanting to go to kind of a nerdy conference where a bunch of people are there all excited about beavers. The next one is in Minneapolis, Minnesota in September. And if you can look at that QR code or just simply look the conference up. And that's all. To sum up, I just wanted you to come away with that there is a strong beaver movement going on out there because of the ecosystem services, including managing agricultural chemicals and helping farmers. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. If you could stay on the screen, I think we'll bring everybody up. What an incredible amount of synergy here. And I think that the issues you're raising, all of the speakers who are getting themselves on the screen as we speak, go to the basic question of how do we collectively, as people concerned about a livable future, bring together all the elements. We tend to, I think, with our work, stay in lanes or silos that separate conversations. So the beaver people don't talk to the bat people necessarily, and the bat people don't talk to the bird people. And meanwhile, the people that are managing the land are faced with pest problems that really drive decision making that doesn't take advantage of all the knowledge that is assembled here on this panel. So with that sort of context, I think we do have a series of questions that have come up, and we're trying to organize them in themes. We've gotten questions about diversity issues, and when you're talking about habitat and natural ecosystems, how do you balance what are considered pests and beneficial? A lot of people have used the word beneficial. We have Terry Shistar on our board doesn't like it when we talk about beneficial insects because she sees all insects as part of the ecosystem. that are needed in a balanced and managed ecosystem. But when we're talking about farmland or parkland or forestry, we are certainly talking about managed systems, and that's where the word pest creeps in. So in that context, or as a subset of that, we deal extensively about with invasive species, and there's a question about how do we talk about invasives, and to what extent have you encountered that question, and do they offer, in some cases, any beneficial support to ecosystems in that context? Ecological traps have gotten a lot of traction in this conversation. People are very concerned that, I want to support bats, but my neighbor's spraying pesticides in the suburban urban environment, or my farmer neighbors is spraying pesticides. And I don't want to create an ecological trap is sort of coming in here. So there are a lot of specific questions about specific pesticides having adverse impacts on bats. Like, we've seen the neonicotinoid insecticides be very problematic when it comes to contamination of pollen, nectar, and guttation droplets on plants, and indiscriminate poisoning of foraging insects. I don't know if you guys, any of you, have come across that issue in your work, the systemic pesticides that are taken up by the vascular system of plants and then expressed and then contaminate and poison. So I'm wondering if anybody wants to jump in right here and even ask other panelists, presenters, questions before I try to organize these themes and ask for your input on that. Let me just put that out there. Any thoughts generally as follow-up to your co-presenters? Okay, that's fine. One of the things we at Beyond Pesticides, just to sort of create a framework as well for the conversation here, deal with is when we're going on to parkland and playing fields. The first question we get by park superintendents often is, what organic pesticides can I use instead of the Roundup or glyphosate? And our conversation then has to shift toward, well, we're not talking about product substitution here. We're talking about creating and supporting an ecosystem in which you will prevent some of the pest problems that you're experiencing. And I think, Joanne, that's what you're talking about, right? When you're talking about having diversity on the farm, which brings diversity of wildlife and ecosystems. Are farmers seeing that more as they focus in on individual weeds or individual insects or fungal diseases? And how do we shift the conversation when we've got a lot of monocultural operations in California and elsewhere around the world that don't lend themselves very well to the diversity of vegetation and crops that would then support the diversity of wildlife and organisms that we really need? How's that conversation going?
Yeah, well, farmers are depending on where they are in this continuum. There's farmers that are probably never gonna get there in my lifetime, but there's a bunch of farmers that are the innovators that are models that we lift up, and other farmers, they'll start small. Maybe they want to put in a little hedgerow, or maybe they're just going to put up a few nest boxes, but they start to see that there's benefits to these things and that they want to build off of that. And so we are trying to lift up those research stories and pair them with farmers so that there's the documentation that shows this stuff works and it can work on the farm. It's not just science. And so we are getting lots of traction about that. I would love to expand more into promoting information about bats. We've had a couple of speakers in our past webinar series talk about bats, but it'd be really cool to work with Dr. Russo. And we also have partners that work here in California on beavers, have help put some presentations together around that, and yeah, need to build that out, because Wild Farm Alliance is more than just birds and beneficial insects and hedgerows.
Right.
But our invasive species, we think that most non-native species are not good on the landscape. I'm saying most because there's a few that maybe they're okay. We don't like them if they're spreading, but we also don't like non-natives that don't support all those caterpillars that birds eat. And the insects have evolved with the plants. So you bring in something from across the world and have it grow here, it may not support that insect diversity that is the bottom of the food chain that we need. So I'll stop there, let others talk.
Okay. So the flip side of diversity are these ecological traps. And, we talk a lot in the US about transition to organic and the barriers to that, including a 3-year transition and the cost of transition. Dr. Russo, how do you... Oh, I think we're friendly enough now. We can call you Danilo, right?
Please do.
How do you make that transition? I know a lot of your work has been done on organic farms, so you're able to document the value to the organic farmer who's already embraced the concepts more generally, but not always. And so, what's your suggestion for those that are trying to help make this transition and exhibit this awareness or this understanding that there's value in bringing the ecosystem onto the farm?
Yeah, never ask a researcher what's important, because the answer is normally we need more research, right? And this is the case again. I mean, we have examples from organic farms that promoting the presence of predators, including bats, is super important. And we probably don't have enough studies in conventional farms. The ideal thing would be to explore a gradient of conditions from purely organic to strictly conventional in intensive, to see to what extent by changing variables in the system you will have a response in terms of ecosystem services provided by, well, I'm speaking about bats, but this is actually, this holds for all components you may imagine. Certainly, we do need best practice examples. I fully agree with what just Joanne said about the importance of promoting good management through good practice examples. And I think the ideal situation would be also to find funds for supporting good practice, just to demonstrate that a more sustainable management is possible, to get out of the ecological trap danger, which I think is real. I mean, if we just confine ourselves to working on some aspects of a more complex system, the outcome would be way different from what we desire, right? So, we heard about hedgerows, and hedgerows are fantastic tools to increase diversity in farm ecosystems. But just working on farmlands, on hedgerows, or just working on roost availability or whatever, would certainly improve the short-term situation of getting certain beneficial species present. But on the other hand, we don't really know where we're going. Probably we need to try and move from this simple solution to more complex solution. This may cost something, okay? This is transition which is not costless, it's not effortless, but I definitely believe that we need a lot more research and a lot of more best practice examples to see how we can make this transition as smooth as possible and move from what is conventional to something which is as close to nature as possible. You highlighted a comment from the audience. Someone said that they didn't like the idea of beneficial insects. As an ecologist, I fully agree. I mean, animals are unethical, right? They have no morals. So there is in fact, there is no pest or there is no beneficial thing. We live in worlds of interactions, and when human actions interfere with these interactions, it will change the balance in the dynamics. I think this is something that we should really understand. We speak about pest insects, but out there we have thousands and thousands of potential pests, which are not so just because of natural control. So it all depends really, this is terminology which I fully agree can be a little bit deceiving, because there is no definition. It's just completely variable depending on the system. So if we restore natural dynamics and biodiversity in farm systems, but this holds for forests and whatever, even for urban ecosystems, as much as we can, then we'll be more able to mimic what happens in nature, and sort of push back components which are now overwhelming, such as pests, into their natural role. So we'll probably be able to drop the beneficial or pest definitions, which is ideal, but it would be great actually.
Well, that's something that we have to be able to teach, because, when all these terms came up, like integrated pest management, in the 70s, the whole question that was driving the so-called judicious use of pesticides was threshold economic damage associated with a pest, and that drove the situation, rather than sort of embracing the notion that there could be preventive action taken that avoided the imbalance that's creating the economic damage to the pest.
One of
Um,
the one of
to the
the
crop, sorry.
terms we like to use is natural enemies, which are beneficial insects, but a lot of growers don't know what that means, or people know what that means, but they're part of that ecosystem, and birds are natural enemies, bats are natural enemies to these or other organisms.
So let's go back to the invasives, since we're talking about pests. It's huge here. I don't know about in Europe, but in the US, it drives a lot of herbicide use. It's part in many areas. It's actually part of restoration efforts by environmental organizations that are feeling that the habitat is being imbalanced by the invasive species. And that could be a weed, so-called weed. We're not supposed to use the word weed either, because you've got this is a plant that's not in the place where you want it to be, and it becomes a weed, right? But in the case of invasives, it is driving a lot of decisions by municipalities, by farmers, to use herbicides. I think we're using more herbicides now than we're using pesticides or insecticides. Sorry. Um, is there a way to talk about invasives in your experience that identifies some beneficials? And do you see in your hedgerows, Sam, do you see any in so-called invasives? I think we lost Sam there.
It just quit.
Oh, well, he just asked you what you think about.
I'm sorry, my screen just quit. So here I'm.
Okay. I was asking you about whether you see invasives coming into hedgerows.
You do see a balance. And I can't say that there's been any outstanding incident because the thing that kind of runs this a lot of times is the farmers who've had them want more. They'll do a hedgerow, and then they say, well, this is really working for us. Let's do another one over here, or let's replant this one when it's thing. So that the short answer to what you say is no. I mean, we have seen some issues where people think gophers or rats or something move in, and there's And sparrows, a lot of times, like we have a hedgerow right next to this conventional broccoli field where there's a huge area where the sparrows came in and just ate this big section of this conventional farm. And that farmer wasn't very happy with the hedgerow on the other side of the fence. But again, it's like there's no 100% in this.
About the coyote brush, some growers think that's an invasive species.
Oh yeah, and sometimes like we have a plant called Baccharis, which it's a sunflower family coyote brush. It has male and female, and sometimes the seeds that it has a fluffy seed that spreads out on the fields, and um, but the complaints are so low that yeah, I mean it's one of the things we do is take farmers around on demonstration tours and show
Yeah,
a lot of these things, and I think that's a very good tool for this. To, your bigger question of how do you get people looking at this is to go see the ones that are there and really.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean,
Field days and so forth. That's very influential. Yeah.
our problems, but to me, the benefits overweigh the problems. There's like nothing's perfect. We all know that. So, did you get my screen back up? We don't know. My screen just went dead on it.
Yeah. So Tony, I was glad to hear we always think of the Corps of Engineers as being insensitive to ecosystems and protecting ecological balance. So do you know the evolution of that development? How did an organization like the Corps come around to understanding the importance of a species that it probably one time wanted to eradicate?
I think the driver for that new language, we're talking about that nationwide 27 that is now saying that beavers can be part of restoration. I did some research on that and talked to some people. It came out of the mitigation banking industry, stream mitigation and wetland mitigation banking industry. And if if for folks that don't know what that is, that's kind of like carbon credit banking. You can sell your carbon credits. In this case, a mitigation banker. Well, let's back up. If someone destroys a wetland, the Corps of Engineers requires them to restore a wetland somewhere else. Compensatory mitigation or stream for that matter. So there are bankers out there that will go out and take a section of damaged streams and wetlands and bring in nice, knowledgeable people and restore them. And the Corps of Engineers gives them a number of credits for the number of acres of wetlands they've restored and the number of feet of stream they have restored. And they can sell those credits on a market. And
Yeah.
so these bankers were recognizing that they were locked into only using bulldozers to do their restoration. It was this high intensity. They had seen that beavers, oftentimes beavers would move into their restoration project and do a better job than the $1 million they spent doing the restoration themselves. So they're saying, so they lobbied the Corps, the Walton Family Foundation, Meridian Foundation, and the ERBA, which is the Ecological Restoration Association, which is the mitigation bankers.
Yeah.
They they pulled panels with together and came up with lobbying to the Corps and to EPA, saying we want you to add beavers to this mix, because before Europeans arrived in America, all of our streams were managed by beavers. And so this new language in this nationwide permit says you can go back to historical conditions before Europeans were in America and restore to that condition, which is wetlands and wetland stream complexes. And we will give you credits to sell on the open market, and beavers can be part of your project. It would be much more profitable because the beavers do it for free. Probably do a little bit of work to set it up where the beavers can handle it. And the beavers will come in and do the restoration, and they will then have credits to sell on the open market.
Yeah. Well, similarly, I know, Danilo, you were involved with Eurobats in the, I guess, the European Union or in Europe. And out of that came the agreement on conservation of populations of European bats. what's the politics around that? The US is, I won't even go into our politics, but and the US is not a part of many of these international conventions. It's a very sad story historically on either conservation or on issues around restricting the most hazardous pesticides even. So the POPs, the persistent pesticides. So you chaired a session of that at one point, and what coalesces to get something like that moving, and what are you affecting a cultural shift? What types of groups engage in that, and how does that move forward?
Okay, so URBAT is a UNEP convention, so United Nations Environmental Program Convention, including many countries, not just the EU, actually, also countries outside the EU, European countries, and we also have a
I thought
very
it
broad
started in among European countries, no?
Yes. But we actually, the geographic scope of the agreement also encompasses countries which are outside the EU, because bats are migratory species. So, it does make much sense to protect the species in just an area when they will move somewhere else and probably encounter problems there. So it actually tackles all 45 European bat species, and member states are active part of the process, actually. So the Eurobat has a standing agreement which is made of officers from different ministries of the countries involved, but also an advisory committee which is made of scientists and bat specialists. So we tend to meet every year, and we work on resolutions which will then be discussed and approved at the meeting of parties, which are sort of offering the basis for member states to generate their national laws in order to protect bats. So, for example, we worked on the big topic of pesticides, on wind turbines, of light pollution. We published guidelines on the management of artificial lighting and wind farms and so on. And the single states will then use this information to generate their own legislation based on the resolutions which are approved every 4 years by the meeting of parties. So that's the broadly how the system works. And a big deal of Eurobat is also about outreaching. So we work a lot on raising awareness and promoting activities such as, for example, bat nights, international bat nights in the countries involved, in order to talk to people about the importance of bats and why it's important not only to protect bats, but also their habitats, their ecosystems. You can use actually bats as very effective umbrella species, because protecting bats and the diversity of habitats they need will also have very positive effects on many other biodiversity components. So we see the action of Eurobats as sort of trespassing boundaries, the taxonomic target of just protecting bats, and moving on to sort of broader context, which tackles the ultimate goal of protecting biodiversity across Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, part of the challenge we have in the US is that and maybe the core of that example you're giving, Tony, is somewhat of an exception, but a lot of the investors, say the bankers, view pesticides as insurance for their loans. They don't see the value of the ecosystem as what they ought to be protecting in terms of protecting their investment in farming. So, we have institutional barriers, I think, that are tremendous. And the fact that organic in the US is a $70 billion industry is somewhat amazing, given, where we started 30 years ago on putting in place an organic labeling law. So I think that, the challenge we have right now, and we tell people this all the time, is that, and Joanne, I know you're always out there commenting before the National Organic Standards Board, and recognizing that unless the public engages, like you're talking about in Europe, I mean, you've got a lot of scientific engagement, public engagement, political policymaker engagement. Unless we can create that momentum here in the US, I think we will see changes in what organic is. You know, we have a really great structure in terms of and values around land management and so forth. But you know, the influential folks that see an opportunity for a niche market and a higher profit margin, you know, may want to weaken the laws that govern organic. And I know, Joanne, you're pushing for native habitat to be retained and protected in the growth of agricultural land and growth of organic agricultural land. You want to mention that as a continuing issue?
Yeah, it was a few years ago, we worked really hard with the National Organic Standards Board, which Jay was part of at one point, to like 14 out of 15 members agreed that they were going to update the regulations so that you can, right now, you can take out a beautiful prairie and get then apply for certification the next day. But if you have that beautiful prairie and certify it as part of your farm, you can't touch it. You also, in the organic regulations, need to conserve biodiversity and including soil, water, wetlands, woodlands, and wildlife. And so there's already some language in there about how biodiversity is important, and there's this big loophole. So thought we were gonna change the rule because the board recommended to the government, the USDA, that they needed to change it, but the USDA is not budging. And now, you know, with the new administration, it won't budge for some time.
But this is just a plea. That example is a perfect example of why we plea with the public to engage with the National Organic Standards Board. This is a stakeholder board that includes 3 farmers, 3 environmentalists, 3 consumer advocates, a scientist, I say that, a certifier, and retailer. And you know, it's got more than recommendation authority, or advisory authority. It has the authority of determining what materials are allowed on an organic farm, which is called the National List of Allowed and Prohibited Substances. So just a little plea here, or pitch, for in taking a look at that process. The board meeting that was coming up here in November was just canceled due to the government shutdown, but it meets twice a year. And if we're going to get to the balance and the diversity and the recognition that the ecosystem is something to be partnered with and not exploited, we are going to need organic to be the best it can be. It's a structure already in place. We have the mechanism for public participation. We have all the structures in place. We just need to use it as a public. I mean, we get like 3,000 comments, I think, twice a year, 3, maybe 4, to the board, the NOSB. We should be getting 10,000, and it should be taking the information from a forum like this and saying, we need to protect our future by ensuring that we have a form of agriculture that integrates ecosystem protection of soil, microbiota, and all the things that are necessary. Now, shifting to soil microbiota, there have been questions here about the effect of climate on these I can't say beneficial species, but on species that we want to protect, which should be all of them. And, you know, we talk about organic and we talk about land management as an opportunity to eliminate petrochemicals, as well as draw down atmospheric carbon and contribute to mitigation measures around climate. can we use any examples from your research or your experience that shows that we really better do this? I mean, beavers are a great example. Ecosystem engineers, protecting against drought, um, helping us weather some of these problems that we're suffering from, and things would only get worse without them. Are there examples with bats and birds that you're seeing on the ground as a result of climate change that are driving losses? I mean, we also have wildfires as well that are driving losses in the context in which you're working.
Sure. May I start? Yeah, we unfortunately we have examples of climate change affecting bat species. We are having, for example, high mass mortality due to heat waves. And for example, in bat boxes, these sudden heat waves may also kill hundreds of individuals, and this was recorded in North America, but also in Europe. We do know that, for example, in rehab centers, wildlife rehab centers across Europe and for sure in Italy, there is a clear correlation between the number of individual bats rescued by people in summer and the occurrence of heat waves. So we do know that acute dehydration and hyperthermia are main factors affecting bats adversely in relation to climate change. We also know that bats are changing their distribution in relation to climate change. Some species are shrinking or will shrink their range according to predictions, and others will expand their ranges. And when moving from the species level to a community level, there's a big question mark about what's going to happen, because these changes in distribution will only mean that the communities we are going to see assembled by these processes will be way different from the ones we already know, and interactions among species are really even less predictable. So you might hypothesize that in some cases newcomer will displace species which were locally very important and take their place. Okay. In terms of pest control, another very interesting field of research is the potential mismatch between predators and prey. Because predators are changing their distribution or will change their distribution, and prey will do the same. And you may imagine that in certain area, there will be a different degree of overlap between predator and prey, including, for example, bats and their prey, including bats and pest prey, actually. So one of the potential effects of climate change might be a reduction or a change in the suppressing potential of bats in areas where distributions are no longer matched. And of course, bats are hibernating animals. They are highly dependent on climatic factors. So again, the effect of changing temperature will probably affect the hibernation time of these animals.
Yeah. And the way we think about it, and I know you do as a holistic thinker, is that to avoid these problems, I mean, obviously the situation is urgent and existential, but unless we go through a more massive transition of how we manage land in sync with ecosystems, we don't have a prayer's hope, to turn things around and protect these species. So it's sort of interwoven, on the one hand, we're searching around for, ways to align and partner with nature. On the other hand, we're so overwhelmed by the destruction of habitat or the mismanagement of land with petroleum products, fertilizers, and pesticides that we don't take advantage of the ability to correct some of these problems, or at least try to reverse them through measures that draw down carbon or eliminate emissions through the production of products that are contributing to greenhouse gases. Not to mention nitrous, we talk about carbon, but we forget about nitrous oxide, associated with synthetic nitrogen. So
Oh,
I think, we have to start connecting these things. And one of our big frustrations is that the public tends to chase after the individual problem that they're facing, right? So they read a story about a particular pesticide that's glyphosate, of course, comes up, Roundup, and then we begin chasing that chemical in our community. We have to chase the chemical in the context of an overall failure to manage the ecosystem. Every ban bill of a bad pesticide, whether it's neonicotinoids affecting pollinators or it's herbicides affecting habitat for monarch butterflies, every one of those campaigns needs to be linked back to the ecosystem effects more broadly and the limitations of the regulatory process in forcing a conversation around the ecosystem effects. Um, we have the opportunity to do more alternatives analysis. I know in one of your pieces, Danilo, you talk about a precautionary approach, and maybe this is the last question. That's a bad word in the United States. You can't go to a regulatory agency and ask for a precautionary approach. Even though we try, whatever. Do you think that's a concept that is more approachable in Europe or in Italy, or do you get pushback when you use the word precaution?
Well, let me be frank. It's more approachable only on paper, actually, because politicians just face emergencies, and they want to have in terms of also of public feedback, right? So if you use a precautionary approach, it means that you have to sort of change the philosophy with which you manage the environment. And probably, you would either avoid future danger or improve the situation, but on a long term, which is way longer than the election or the electional time will tolerate. So I think it's not just a US problem, it's a more general problem. But it's something that we should really be aware of in ecology. We have very interesting examples of extinction deaths, for example. You lose the environment, and then you will lose the species only many years after that particular habitat has disappeared, right? Because you don't see it immediately. You will see the effects only year after the impact on the environment. And for climate change, it's basically the same. We speak about climatic debt because actually what we are experiencing today is the fingerprint of a changing climate, which took place years before, right? And you live in this kind of dynamic systems which are somewhat unpredictable. The only way forward is to use a precautionary approach. However scary the definition may sound, I think there's no other way around. And can also get back to the concept of invasive species. You mentioned invasive species. It was a very interesting conversation about that. I would like to add that again. This is to some extent a problem which is related to the way we manage ecosystems and landscapes. Because if you have all your ecological filled by living world, so if your system is biodiverse, the space for invasive species to get through and settle down is way more reduced than in a situation which is disturbed. So again, it's not the invader to be the real problem, but it's the opportunity we provide to the invader. And again, we need a holistic analysis, and we need to develop, I think, a better sense of ecology, which is complex by definition. And yes, it also involves precautionary approaches.
All right. What a note to end on. Really, really appreciate your engagement with us today, and I'm sure the participants do as well. We've got questions for your slide presentations, if you're willing to share them with people, and a long list of other questions. A lot of people want to put in hedgerows and bat boxes, protect the beavers. So if you don't mind, we will pass some of those questions on to you, and keep engaging and keep doing what you guys are doing. It's you're on the cutting edge and front edge of the front lines of the change that needs to happen. You are the change. So thank you all for being here, and thank you to those participants who hung in here. With this, we will be putting a recording up of this incredible session today and really pushing it out there as best we can. And hope to be in touch with all of you soon again. So, and maybe even go
For
to
having us.
BeaverCon.
Yeah. I'll see you all at BeaverCon. Yeah.
Yeah, see you at the BeaverCon. Okay, guys. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jay.
very much.